Hello, music lovers. My name is Carter, and welcome back to Recording Records. Today, we're doing another edition in our series Quick Reviews with a quick review of the new album Vultures 2 from Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, and Ty Dolla $ign. Now, before we get into the review of Vultures 2, I do want to briefly cover my review of Vultures 1. I haven't published it on YouTube yet, but I have written it out and posted it on my Instagram account where I usually post these beforehand. So, I want to quickly get into that. The Vultures 1 was kind of a mixed bag of songs. There wasn't like amazing high-end songs, but there were some like pretty good high-end songs, and then there's a lot of low-end. The thing of Vultures 1, which was a very hated album when it came out and still is to this day. The thing with Vultures 1 is it lacked an identity. The mixing was questionable at times, and it lacked any form of consistency in terms of sound. The closest consistency of sound was that where a lot of it would imitate a club sound, but even then there was a lot which tried to vary without having some form of success with fitting within a theme or sounding in any way natural. And it didn't really feel like it had a reason to exist in the first place. It just sounded like it was there to be there. And when listening to this album Vultures 2, the second album of the proposed trilogy, Vultures 1, Vultures 2, and Vultures 3, it has a lot of the same problems. The mixing, most noticeably, is one of the first things you'll notice, is not really great. Now, this should be expected because, obviously it's great compared to most normal people, but compared to Ye or someone of this status, it really wasn't that great. And this should be expected because in 2022, Ye had the huge controversy where he was blowing up everywhere. He gets disavowed by a lot of people, and a lot of his production team leaves. Now, people do generally consider Ye as an amazing producer within the rap genre. He's in hip-hop genre. He's produced for so many different artists, and undoubtedly, Ye is one of the smartest people, if not the smartest people, when it comes to sonics and hearing sound and making sounds. He is one of the most innovative people when it comes to sound. And also, he happens to be amazing at creating rhythms. But there has been parts in his career where you can sort of see parts of his mixing and mastering really being lacking in that same attribute of quality when it comes to those other things, which he is so amazing at. For example, I'm reminded of in Stronger, he had to go to Timbaland to have the drums mixes. He just couldn't figure out. Or in a lot of his recent work, he is his remix of Like That for his Drake diss that he did. The sonics of that song were amazing, but the mixing did ask for more. Another example of an album we'll eventually review we haven't gotten to, and So Appalled in My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, the audio peaks and cuts out twice within the track. And so there are a lot of examples, or in Donda, I think the same thing happened. So there are a lot of examples of stuff like this, especially now of recent, but there's also examples of amazing productional work, even within his recent work, Carnival, despite the whole fall off it had after the TikTok Riz party, the production on that song was amazing. For the most part, there were issues with the balancing of Cardi's audio and his verse. But there's a lot of examples of flaws when it comes to mixing, and as we've seen to narrow it down the production team, I feel like this is really becoming a bigger issue, and people really weren't picking it up or noticing it because it wasn't really an issue on a lot of his work, especially with people like Mike Dean being on board. Now that he's out the picture, we're really seeing this come to the forefront. Now there are tracks that are all right mixing wise, but there's tracks where literally the synth starts peaking and you can hear the peak coming through. So there's definitely some issues. Even so far as I believe on Yeezy.com, it says that the album will continue to be updated, and that probably means that there's either going to be new tracks and or some of these tracks will be updated, similar to how there was in The Life of Pablo on the original release. A lot of the tracks were edited. And then there was, I think, St. Pablo wasn't even on the original release, which is a fantastic song. So glad we got St. Pablo. But this is even something that it seems that he probably knows, which would make sense. He is one of the top selling artists ever, so he should probably know that sounds a bit whack. But I guess he just produced it anyways to published the album. And that's what this album really feels like. At its core, to get into the album, it feels like it was just made to be made. When we talk about something like The College Dropout, you have the story there. You have him dropping out of college, going through the accident. You have him trying to push it through from, just being seen as a producer and trying to become an independent artist. And we see the evolution of Ye. We see that go through late registration. We see graduation really be an uplifting of spirits. We see My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy show where he was, his candid thoughts, and, a reflection upon, how stardom has shaped him into who he was, such a controversial figure. We saw 808s and Heartbreaks. We saw him go through and express heartbreak with the death of his mother and the breakup with Amber Rose. We saw with Yeezus, it's a look into his life. There's a chaos to it. It's a look at his life and where he is specifically. We see the life of Pablo. We see a similar thing where it shows sort of the chaos within his own life with these three different main plot lines coming together to create this story. We see this with Donda, where we see the grief of his mother flow into him trying to make a dedication to her. We see Jesus is King, where his religious aspect, spawns a want to create a religious album. When it comes to Vultures, what is the reason for its existence? With Vultures 1, at least, there was a bit, even though this album didn't feel like it needed to exist either, there was a bit of maybe he's just trying to get back at the industry, and so he's trying to create club type beats so that they're mass played, and then that's him getting back at the industry by creating relevance. There were two things I caught, one of them being that he talked at some point about materialism, and he also referenced some of his old work, making it sound like this is this is his reflective stage of his past. He says on site in one of the words, he says, he references Good Life. He says, look at you in one of the songs, and references to Runaway. So maybe that's a theme, but it's not consistent enough throughout the album to really warrant a diagnosis for the reason for this album. It really sounds like it was just created. And albums don't need to have a theme to be amazing, but the fact that it doesn't sound like it was made for a specific reason really pushes into the quality of the album. And some of the songs don't feel like they have a reason for it existing, which sort of plays off onto the fact that this album just exists to exist, just to give more content to its fans, or just to create more beats, or the fun or the thrill of making music. It doesn't sound like there's something that he is trying to strive for, or something that he is trying to push towards. It just sounds like he is creating things and then making them, and there is this absence of perfectionism that we sort of expect with a lot of Ye's work. Some of these tracks need heavy editing. The concepts seem a bit underachieved, and obviously, as we talked earlier, the production in some tracks undermines its concept. Now, to get into the substance of the album, in comparison to something like Vultures 1, there's a lot less songs on the high end. There's a lot more around the median end of the average score of the album, if we were to just average out every track score. Although neither of them are neither of them are that different in average, but Vultures 1 has more around that high end, to where if I'm listening to Vultures 1, I have a reason to listen to it, because there's some songs around the high end that maybe get my hopes up and will keep me engaged a little. There really isn't that much on Vultures 2. There's some songs which are pretty nice, but there's nothing around the high end of Ye's work, or even a lot of hip hop work, to where it really warrants me to really want to finish the album. Now, what I do want to say is that the consistency of the sound of the album isn't terrible. It doesn't feel like a playlist. It does have some album-y things. This album brings back interludes which weren't in Vultures 1. And there is some form in some ways. The songs don't deviate too much to where they feel like they're causing detriment to the overall feel of the album. But there are all these issues. We talked about production, we talked about lack of identity, we talked about how it seeps into the tracks, and some of the tracks do feel a bit unfinished, you could call. or they feel like the concepts that they were really shooting for haven't been achieved, or something I haven't been talked about yet. Some of these verses don't really fulfill where the song could be. You know, like the song could be something good. It might have a nice beat, but the verse is just not great. But with that being said, there is at least that consistency in the sound for the most part to where it doesn't feel like a playlist. Now, with that being said, there's some songs that with some editing I think could be considerably better. And so hopefully with the promise of the album continuing to update, maybe it'll get better. I hope he just doesn't flood it with more tracks. You know, honestly, I'd be in favor of him removing tracks. I don't think he'll do that, but I really don't want him to flood tracks like we see with like Donda, where it's just absolutely full of just like track after track after track. I hope he doesn't do that. He might. You know, I hope he sticks towards editing some of these songs, maybe eliminating one, and then if he wants to add one because it's really good, go ahead. But I'm not really hopeful. I wasn't really hopeful for Vultures 2 in the first place. Everyone was asking for Vultures 2. And everyone was excited for Vultures 1. I was excited for neither of them. I saw the production team leaving, yay, and I'm like, dude, this album's gonna suck, okay? And it's not really like, it doesn't suck. I shouldn't say that. But for the standard of yay, it's, you know, it kind of is questionable how it comes from the same artist. But again, it doesn't have the same team. And it's not like he has the same team for every album, but there's a lot of people that are there along the way very commonly, and they're not here in this album. And you can really feel it. So with that all being said, as of now, I'm going to give this album probably a 6.75 out of 10. I know it's a bit confusing to hear after hearing me not really harp on a lot of good points and really just talk about a lot of bad things. But if you're new to my channel, I explained this in Quick Reviews 1. I view 1 out of 10 as like the floor of music and 10 out of 10 as like the ceiling of music. And we're so beyond blessed with music. Most music is way closer to the ceiling than it is the floor. If you don't believe me, download GarageBand or something and just like grab like a MIDI for like a piano or something and just start spamming the MIDI keyboard with notes and then put on like a bunch of random percussion that doesn't make sense. And you can hear the floor music. Or you like do like some like really weird time signature. You can hear the floor music, okay? This is not the floor. So even with all that stuff, in comparison to the floor of music, this is still around that range of like 6.75 out of 10, which is crazy to think about. But again, you know, there's all those issues with the album that need to be talked about. But, you know, I do want to say there are some things I did like. As I said, the album does feel albumy at times. I don't think the floor was too terrible. And, you know, I do think this album could be a lot better with some working. But again, I don't know how hopeful I am for it. I'm really, you know, obviously I do hope that the album, you know, just for all of us that listen to it, just for the viewers once, I do hope that the album gets improved but I don't know how hopeful I am for it. But we'll have to see, and when it does, maybe I'll be back here. Make sure to subscribe so that once it does get fixed a bit, maybe I'll be here to review it. And hopefully maybe it'll just be a whole lot better. But until then, make sure to subscribe and, you know, go ahead and hit that notification bell if you want to see the next upload. I upload here kind of oftenly. Sometimes I do these quick reviews, and sometimes I do really in-depth reviews where I'll talk about like the instrumentation and productional stuff. Now I'll really get into the deep. So make sure if you want to check out some of my content. I should have something recommended come up on the screen here momentarily. But regardless of what you do, you know, have a good day. God bless. Goodbye. Bye-bye.